let's talk about sequence diagrams. These are going to be what we create from our extended use scenarios. So in our extended use scenarios, we did a bunch of steps showing the interactions in our system, and this is where we're going to use those interactions that we created in our extended use scenarios in order to display them in a diagram. So sequence diagrams show how objects in the system interact with each other. They follow the same steps that are in the extended use scenarios. So we are prepared because those extended use scenarios already list out the steps. So now we just got to transfer them to our diagram. So the objectives for this section are to create sequence diagrams. We're going to add external actors such as our employee or customer and our payment system, and we're going to add objects such as our user interface or our user objects. So you'll see. We're going to show the messages and return values. So what message, what method gets called, and what value gets returned. We're going to include any additional details such as parameters or any notes that might be necessary, and we're going to update our class diagram as necessary. So I just walked through these, so I'm going to go ahead and pass this. So what is a sequence diagram? A sequence diagram shows object interactions arranged in a time sequence. Now our extended use scenario is in a time sequence already, since it's written out as a real life scenario that could happen with our system. And just by the nature of how scenarios work, that's going to be a sequential in time. And so it depicts objects involved in the scenario, the sequence of the messages exchanged between the objects needed to carry out the functionality of the scenario. So what are the benefits of having a sequence diagram? So they are going to model the logic of sophisticated procedure, function, or operation. We're going to see how objects and components interact with each other to complete a process. And it helps us to plan and understand the detailed functionality of an existing or future scenario. Let's jump into it. Looking at the example here, this is an example of a sequence diagram. Not really, but it has the elements in it. So let's talk about each of these elements. We have the name of the use scenario here. So this is our sequence diagram title. We have our actor here. We have our classes or objects here. And then these are going to be listed across the top for the most part. And then we have our method calls and our returns. So let's walk through this a little bit. Let's talk a little bit more about these objects. So we have our user here. So this is our actor. So this is whatever is interacting with our system. And so this little guy here is going to be on the left usually at least in our sequence diagrams. Then we have this symbol here for an external actor. This could be an email system. This could be a payment system. So anything that is external from our system, this is what we would use to display that. Here is our object. So anything that has a class name. So this could be user list, user interface, room. I mean, anything that has a class name. This is the syntax we'll use. We use that colon and then class name, and it's in a box just like this. Now, if we have a specialized object, so say I'm on one room, I'm working on room 211, and then in the next minute I'm working on room 410, I want to specify which object I'm working on here for clarity purposes. And you'll see this in the examples we go over. So here we have vertical lines. So what do each of these vertical lines mean? So here we have our lifeline. So this is a really important one that I see mistakes on this one quite often. Our lifeline is the time that our user the time that our object or our actor is alive. So, or that as long as it exists within our system. So the user is going to exist the entire time that our system is being used, right? So the entire time our system is being used, so it will go all the way to the bottom of our sequence diagram. The only time that you will ever see a lifeline stop when it's in our system is when it's being destroyed. And we do have an example of that, so I will show that to you in an upcoming video. Here we have an execution occurrence. So this is when our object or our actor is sending or receiving messages. We want to see this execution occurrence. If it's not sending or receiving messages, if it's not sending or waiting for something to be returned, then we do not need to have this execution occurrence. It's just existing in the system, but it's not being used. So that's an execution occurrence. Here we have our methods and our return value lines. So these are our horizontal lines in the system. We have our message line here, okay, and it's going to have a method and whatever data it needs. And this method and data is going to match whatever is in your extended use scenarios. This does not need to only go one way. It can go both ways, and which we'll talk about that in a minute here. Here's our return values. So whenever we're returning information, we have this dotted line, and we have whatever the return values are listed on top. So now that you have some context for this, this makes a little more sense, right? The user makes a call to a class, the class can make a call to an actor, and it's going to return those values. Okay, so now that we've gone over the basics, let's jump into our examples.